Testing, testing. Fix my mic here. Oosh. That's not right. There we go. Start the stream off strong by immediately wrecking my recording setup. Perfect. There we go. So, today we will be reading The American Dream from Something Awful Forums. I might turn this into a full story on the main channel as a video, but I just wanted to test live reading it, see how that goes, Got my edition running, got some music. All right. The American Dream. This is a story posted to Something Awful in 2003 about a user named Moonshine. He told an unforgettable tale about his experience climbing the corporate ladder to greatness, only to be left behind as a manager without a team. It's not long before he realizes that he's getting paid well doing absolutely nothing. As he struggles to maintain his lifestyle against the forces of human resources and paranoid management, he makes deals with acquaintances to help keep the party going. After a while, he begins to realize that he alone, forgotten by the productive world, has achieved an ideal many can only imagine: the American Dream. Excuse me. Chapter 1. An Epiphany. Oops. An epiphany was had this morning as I perused Something Awful essay, sipping Code Red and toying with the notion of stepping outside for my third cigarette in an hour. 9 years and 2 months of my life have been devoted towards the goal of personal advancement within a small yet thriving company. I arrived one spring morning at the offices of a local company, just a 15-year-old, acne-encrusted, bespectacled face in the crowd, with a dot matrix printed resume extolling my massive ability with the 386 computer and willingness to work after school. I was immediately hired at minimum wage and began a series of menial jobs within said company, including authorizing credit cards and serving as a squeaky-voiced telephone operator. At 16, I graduated from high school and moved off to the wonderful world of college. Yet, for the sole reason of a tuition reimbursement, I continued with the same company, continuing to bounce around from department to department, serving as a van driver, a shipping and receiving inspector, an MIS administrator. I never stayed in one place for very long. It was during this time period, the wonderfully blurry undergraduate years, that I unknowingly sowed the seeds of my current employment bliss. The groundwork was laid. During graduate school, my contributions to said company began to become clear to some in positions of power. I was transferred for the 11th time in 6 years, but this time I held some responsibility for the everyday management of the company. By day, I struggled to comprehend superstrings theory, laboring under the false assumption that a master's degree in physics would bring exciting things for me. By night, I climbed the corporate ladder: supervisorship, management, power. I had it all at age 21. A brand new piece of paper designating me a master in the physical sciences, and a management position in a strong company, a score of people twice my age reporting to me. I worked 70 hours a week, but I believed that I had achieved in a short amount of time what it had taken my father 50 years to attain. Then came September 11th. As the Twin Towers fell, the economy fell with it. Faced with massive layoffs, my company was forced to cut my entire department and leave all responsibilities solely in my hands. I was a manager with no employees, a general without an army. Yet I still toiled. It continued this way for 3 months. I never slept. I spent every waking minute at the office, yet I convinced myself this was still the greatest thing going, the American dream. One day, in a morning coffee and donuts meeting, a vice president suggested that I could move myself and my responsibilities out of the corporate offices to a satellite facility, some 1,000 miles away. Seeing this as an opportunity for advancement, I took the offer. So I arrived, acquired a large office in a remote corner of said facility, and continued on with my march towards greatness. Then something strange happened. In Outlook, an email appeared with my name in the courtesy copy field. Apparently, a new vice president had decided to delegate the responsibilities that were once mine to another department. Immediately, I was frightened for my job and my well-being. I was tempted to scream out, yet thankfully I remained silent. I continued to come to the office on time every day, picked up the random pieces of my old job that were left scattered in the transition, and waited for the word. That, my friends, was 4 months ago to the day. After 30 days, I became convinced that I was a forgotten, non-digestible entity in the corporate stomach. No man ever comes over to ask me for anything, although I am but a manager, and directors roam the hallways like rabid hyenas. I am much too senior to all of them for them to attempt any attack. Every once in a while, the phone will ring, and an old acquaintance will ask for help solving a problem. I gladly comply. Sometimes, I let the phone ring, but the voicemail light never comes on. They move on to the next target, under the false assumption that I am much too busy to be bothered. Unrelated note, but OBS lost the preview chat option on my streaming side. I'll have to figure out how to put that back on later so I don't have to use my phone to view chat, in case anyone shows up. I started coming in later, wearing blue jeans on Mondays, testing my limits. I take 25 cigarette breaks a day, come back into my air-conditioned office, dim the lights, and browse the internet in a half-comatose state until I determine that it is time to pack up for the day. Old copies of Baseball Weekly adorn the mahogany desk, and reams of paper lie in and around the unattended trash bin, each covered with random drawings of stick figures and jet fighters. I often roam the hallways with a piece of paper and a mug of coffee, exchanging pleasantries and talking about the weather and equally mindless topics with my coworkers. I go to meetings, and other managers gaze with reverence at my presence. I am never invited, but to those who know not what I do, I am respected and welcomed. It hit me this morning that perhaps all of my endless toil and hard work has landed me here. I've transferred so much within the company that all paperwork on me has been long since misplaced. I exist only in a computer program that spits out a 4-digit paycheck to my bank account every other Thursday. Just another tick on the underbelly of the corporate war hog. Too senior to be fired, too misunderstood to be bothered. I am truly the forgotten employee. And so, my something awful friends, I can't say the word essay without, raising a flag. I am quite open to suggestions about how I may truly test the boundaries of my newly discovered freedom. A webcam lays in its box underneath my desk, awaiting my motivation to install it. No suggestion is outside the boundary of reason or consideration, for I have now found my holy grail. I have achieved the American dream. Chapter 2. All that I have worked for over the past 5 months of not working nearly came to a horrible death this past Friday. I arrived at the office at 10:30, still dressed in the wrinkled kayak pants from my very lengthy Thursday night at the bar. I sneaked in the side door and made a beeline for my office. On the way, I was stopped by an electrician, who informed me that they were working on the air conditioning in the office building, and that some sections of the sprawling complex would be without electricity during different parts of the day. He reassured me that if I was, indeed, in an occupied area of the building, that I would be informed in plenty of time. Of course, since nobody knows I exist, I expected to be left in the darkness at some point during the day. I eased into my office, shut the door, and sat down at my desk. My morning regimen consists of checking baseball scores, a quick once-over of something awful, then off to randomly scour the network drive for Excel documents. I will pull up at least 5 spreadsheets, ranging from actually important price sheets to recent company softball scores. It doesn't matter, as long as it's an Excel document. I print them out, then walk to the other side of the office building to copy them. Somehow, in my mind, this makes it look like I'm working, and looks are the most important thing. On my way to the copy machine, I was stopped by a fellow manager, one who actually works. He reminded me of a 1100 meeting in the conference room, and I played dumb. You had to have gotten the email. It was sent to all the managers, he replied, not knowing that I was the forgotten employee of Company X. I tried to wiggle my way out of it, but I was stuck. Begrudgingly, I made my way into the brightly lit conference room, thinking that it couldn't be that bad. After all, it was Friday. There would probably be Krispy Kreme donuts, and I could easily just sit there and not say a word. I was very, very wrong. Bad sign number 1. Nowhere in the room was the distinct aroma of honey-glazed goodness. Even the coffee pot was ominously switched off. This is a horribly bad sign in the corporate world. Lack of food means that the meeting will be about only business-related issues. Bad sign number 2. The normal large conference table is nowhere to be found. In its place is a U-shaped formation of folding tables. U-shaped formation equals audience participation, which equals horribly, horribly bad. Bad sign number 3. I reflexively reached over by the door for the inevitable handout, and felt nothing. No handout equals note-taking is mandatory. I begin to have a very sinking feeling about this meeting. Bad sign number 4. Standing in front of the stained dry erase board was the nemesis of all forgotten employees, the Director of People Services, aka Human Resources Nazi. I was a Warsaw Jew, face to face with Himmler. She glanced at me as I quickly averted my stare, but I thought that I may have caught a glimmer of recognition in her eyes, and that, my friends, scared the hell out of me. The beer sweat started rolling off my forehead as I ran through my options. I was about 15 feet inside of the doorway, and Himmler had seen me. Quick flight was out of the question. I was forced to sit through this meeting, and try to keep my cover. Looking at the U-shaped formation of tables, I decided to sit directly in the middle, contending that if any type of let's go around the room shit went on, she would undoubtedly start from one of the ends. I took my company cell phone off and set it on the table, then proceeded to sit and wait. Unfortunately, the meeting turned into my worst nightmare. Buzzwords started keying off alarms in my head as they flowed from the mouth of the hideous HR gargoyle. Teamwork, employee insight, departmental budgets, etc. The meeting was a quarterly employee idea meeting, where managers would gather and share what work their teams had accomplished and what they were looking forward to. Considering my team had been fucking contracted on September 11th, and I was currently a free agent with no intention of signing with anybody, I was worried. And then it happened. Let's go around the room and say what the general view among your reporting employees is as to the future of... Shit. I knew I was fucked, and I needed to get out. My heart skipped a beat as the first ass-kisser on the end started babbling away about how great his employees are, and started calling them off by name. I needed a fire alarm, a stroke, or a meteor strike, and I needed it soon. before I was forced to open my mouth and out myself as a non-working leech to the rest of the world. My eyes searched the room for something to help me out. The fire alarm was too far away, as was the window. The light switch was directly behind me, but that was only as a last resort. I had almost given up hope when my eyes situated on the table in front of me. My cell phone. I needed a phone call, and I needed it as soon as possible. Telekinesis failed me for a good 2 minutes as it came closer and closer to being my turn. Then I realized something amazing. I was wearing my bar pants. The beauty of my bar pants is that they have amazingly deep pockets, and nestled down past the crumpled up $1 bills, the napkins, the receipts, and the Bud Light bottle caps was my saving grace, my wife's cell phone. And listed under the letter A in her pre-programmed numbers was my work cell phone. A rush of excitement filled me, and my hand started slowly inching towards my pocket. Because of the angle of my leg, I couldn't reach into my pants without drawing unwanted attention, so I had to make a go at it from the outside. It was only 2 clicks, one on the down button in the middle to highlight my number, the other on the send button. But timing was crucial, as it came closer to my time to speak. I felt down the outline of the phone, my fingers skimming the display screen, and pushed down once on the scroll button, then mashed to its left to send the call. I believed victory was mine, but unfortunately, the phone on the desk remained silent. 10 seconds passed, 20 seconds, and yet nothing happened. I had obviously highlighted the wrong name to call. It struck me as mildly humorous that somewhere one of my wife's friends was answering a call from her cell phone, blissfully unaware of my epic struggle to free myself from the meeting from hell. As soon as it was obvious that I had dialed the wrong number, I moved my thumb back to the right and punched the end button approximately 10 times, hoping to cancel everything out. The train of talking had reached the person sitting next to me, and the focus of the room was in my general direction. I probably only had one chance to pull it off, and I had to do it discreetly. With my body turned towards the speaker, my hand creeped down once more. I coughed slightly as a distraction while my fingers made a ninja flick across the scroll and send keys. Then I moved my hand to the table and waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds went by. The person next to me was finishing up. It was almost my turn. I thought I was completely done for, and then it happened. The cell phone lit up, and the telltale Nokia tone started resonating throughout the room. All eyes shot to me as I tried my hardest to contain my elation. I grabbed the phone and pushed the answer button. "Ben," I said authoritatively. My voice echoed through the speaker as the cell phone in my pocket picked up the background noise. "Oh, yes, sir. Mr. Name of a company vice president at the corporate office. I have that information at my desk. Can it wait?" "Oh, and I understand." Then covered up the phone and said to the HR Nazi, "Do you mind?" She was taken aback, but smiled and nodded. It was all the break I needed. I sprung out of my chair and headed for the door, pretending like I was talking, nodding absent-mindedly to myself, engaged in a pretend conversation with my pants, but I was temporarily free. I hurried back to my office, closed the door, and waited. The time was 12 noon, and I was sure that soon the HR Nazi would show her face and ask to sit down and chat about what I had missed at the meeting. I browsed the essay forums for the next 4 hours, every set of footsteps by my door sending me on a frenzy of window minimization. 4 o'clock rolled by. Cars began to leave the parking lot. My phone had not rung. My Outlook inbox was still empty. At 5 o'clock, the lights went out in my office. I sat in the complete darkness for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. A half hour went by as I sat in a semi-daze, alone in a dark office. Then it hit me. Whew. I was safe. I was forgotten. All was right with the world. I took out my cell phone and played a silent, celebratory game of Snake. Talk about close calls. Chapter 3. I had been dreading this day. In the back of my mind, I knew it was coming. In all of my years here, my anniversary date has held as a beacon of hope, the promise of yet another pay raise, yet another shining star on the corporate report card that would one day land me a corner office with a view. This year, however, I wished that it would never come. I was sure that my 9th anniversary at this corporate juggernaut would raise sufficient enough flags to bring the human resource ninjas swinging through my office windows, sending the old copies of Baseball Weekly and collected Mountain Dew bottles flying in a maelstrom of broken dreams as they hauled me out to some cubicle to start being a productive member of society. That was a run-on sentence. The email was waiting for me as I came in late to work. The return address was a name that I did not recognize, but the all-familiar HR printed in bold at the end of it sent a shiver up my spine. I opened it up, and, all at once, a feeling of relief, bewilderment, and hope overcame me. Moonshine Employee 412, our records indicate that you are due for an annual performance review on September 10th. Please report to your designated department director none-on none for your review. As you are a non-supervised/managerial/other employee, please submit a self-review detailing past accomplishments. Self-reviews must be submitted no later than September 13th to employeereview@companyname.com. Best regards, HR Nazi. I reread the letter twice, trying my hardest to figure out any hidden meanings. The good news was that, from the form letter, it seemed as though they had no idea what I did. I lost my place. Oh, there it is. The bad news was that neither did I. I had 3 days to find out, construct some kind of good response, and send it back in a very unthreatening fashion. I actually needed to do work, and the clock was ticking. So, 20 minutes later, I'm sitting in the bar at Applebee's, downing a cold Bud Light and pondering my situation. Solutions including prolonged vacation, botched workplace injury, and phone call to HR to ask what I do were summarily dismissed, and I had hit a dead end. I finished off another beer, and the thought suddenly hit me. Every 2 weeks, without fail, I had received a paycheck at my house. Although I had rarely opened them, I knew there was a section on there that listed a departmental code, a simple 4-digit number that would hold the answer to what my company thought I did. Hydration. I paid my bill and headed home, determined to wake up in the morning and figure out what I was going to do with myself. Unfortunately, when I got home and opened up an old paycheck, I realized that my departmental code was listed as 0000, which I feared was a default code. I couldn't have been more wrong. I showed up at 0900 on September 11th, marking my first return to actual working hours in months. My first stop was to an accounting section of the building, where I cornered a temp employee and asked, real managerial-like, "What department does code 0000 refer to?" She typed a few numbers in her computer and replied with something that blew me away. Workplace safety. I staggered back a bit, but tried to regain my composure quickly. How many employee entries are there in the workplace safety group? She typed 2 more entries and came back with Moonshine here in Detroit and James Alexander in the Fort Worth office. It was obvious she had no idea who I was, which was a bonus. But my heart sank for a minute as I realized there was someone else in the company who was actually doing the non-job that I was somewhat tasked to do. I retreated to my office and tried to plan my next move. Workplace safety? I thought, trying to take in the gist of what was said to me. Was it then my job to make sure that nobody walked around on stilts or ran with scissors while on company property? Not that it was a huge epidemic around here, but I was somewhat freaked that the next time Lumpy McBumperfuck in shipping and receiving decided to pour lye on his groin, I would be responsible. The only answer was to find James Alexander. I would pretend that I was actually a working safety inspector, and try and pry him about what kind of work he did. I was able to track down the number to the Fort Worth office, and gave him a call. James Alexander was the reply. Or, what voice should I give this guy? James Alexander. James Alexander was the reply. Mr. Alexander, this is Moonshine, the Detroit safety inspector. I was wondering if you could help me with a couple of items that I've got going on up here. There was a pregnant pause, then a quick, hold on, as I was put on hold. About 20 seconds passed by. Then he came back on the line, his voice down at a whisper. Who do you work for? I thought quickly. Greg McDonnell. I lied. I've never even heard of a Greg McDonnell. And he told you to call me? Alexander asked, sounding somewhat worried. No, sir. I did it of my own volition. Yet another pause, then, are you really a workplace safety employee? I recognized something in his voice and decided to take a shot. I knew I was putting everything on the line, but it felt as though I was at that point regardless of whether or not I admitted my status to the stranger on the phone. I took a deep breath and answered a very confident, no. Are you with HR? Was the stern reply. No. Then what do you do? Nothing. There was yet another pause, and a flash of heat cascaded over my skin. There was a barely intelligible snort, almost laughter. Then he replied, Me neither. It was like I had asked him if he had stairs in his house, only the answer was 100 times more exciting. It turns out James Alexander of Fort Worth, Texas, was an original workplace safety inspector and had been with the company for 7 years. About 3 years ago, the department was dissolved and the responsibility for oversight was placed in the hands of our company's quality control department back down in Florida. He was furloughed for a period of 5 months. Then one day he received a letter asking him to return to work. When he returned, he was given temporary quarters in a recently abandoned office and was told that he would be given new assignments shortly. Shortly turned into 2 years. I was amazed that I was not the only one who was forgotten in this corporation. He told me that all he did all day was browse the internet and replace the contents of the first aid kit when they ran low. He had never failed to receive a raise and was never once accosted by any higher-ups. He and I postulated that the computer must have defaulted to a 0000 code when none was inputted for my employee file. Luckily, here 0000 wasn't just a code meaning nothing. It was actually still the defunct workplace safety group. He told me to count my blessings, and hung up the phone with a sincere, good luck. The next day, I showed up at work with a new purpose in life. What I had come across was even better than having no job. I now have a job with no responsibilities. I walked throughout the office, looking at light sockets, chairs, and microwaves, exactly as I supposed that a safety inspector would do. Later that day, I would write my personal review, remembering to keep it vague and short, so as to not rouse attention. James had informed me that most reviews would be automatically answered with a standard raise, without ever crossing the desk of anybody except an HR secretary. Just so long as you don't admit to be doing anything extraordinarily good or bad. So I wrote, Employee, Moonshine 412. Accomplishments. Maintained a 0 accident rate in the Detroit corporate and shipping offices for the entire 2002 calendar year. Responded to every safety issue in a timely fashion. The internal customer service was accomplished within the allotted budget. Heightened awareness for safety-related issues among employees. I hit send and waited for the possible downfall in the next week. This past Wednesday, I showed up at work with a bottle of unaspirin from 7-Eleven and a rubber carpet bumper that I picked up at Home Depot. Back where the employees go out to smoke, The carpet at the door was horribly mangled, and many an unhappy soul was sent crashing to the floor by a misplaced step on the hazard. So, the first thing I did was put the bumper down, and glued it into place using some bullshit Billy Mays fabric crap glue that the yahoo at the Home Depot said worked wonders. It wasn't pretty, but now there was no danger of tripping. I am responsible to workplace safety issues, keeping under budget, as the $9 came out of my pocket. I placed a sign on the wall next to the bumper, seen below. I placed the unaspirin in the break room first aid kit, and proceeded to my office. There was a piece of company mail sitting on my desk, right next to the OSHA posters that I had ordered, as I assumed that any safety inspector's office needed decoration, including a guide to hazardous materials and eye wash station directions. I sat down in my seat, opened the forums, then slowly opened the letter. Moonshine Employee 412. We are pleased to announce that your annual performance review has been deemed satisfactory. As a result, your pay rate has been increased by 5%, retroactive to September 1st, 2002. Sincerely, HR Nazi. Now, a week has passed, and nothing else has happened. I was asked to check a battery in a smoke detector by a secretary yesterday, who had unfortunately seen me place the bumper in the back hallway. So yes, I now have to do some work. But until the camel spiders invade accounting, and I've got fatalities on my hands, I will now continue to sit here, playing Snake on my Nokia and browsing the Something Awful forums. I am Moonshine, the protector of Detroit corporate shipping and receiving, here to make sure nobody falls on my watch. Chapter 4. They're on to us. Those 4 words, ambiguous in meaning, was what greeted me as I opened up Microsoft Outlook one fateful Friday morning. My heart began racing as I realized that the message had come from none other than James Alexander, my counterpart in Texas. Anybody being on to our scheme of hiding under the radar scopes was undoubtedly trouble that would manifest itself in the very next email that I opened. It's never a good sign when the name in the from field is followed by an identifier in brackets, and as I would learn, it was even worse when that identifier was recruiter. I double-clicked on the message, plainly entitled, Question, from Nosy Mick in my business, recruiter, to Moonshine, subject, question. Hi, Moonshine. My name is Nosy, and I'm currently doing a budgetary survey of the Detroit operation. Unfortunately, some of the paperwork for you seems to have been misplaced. I can't seem to place you anywhere on the company organizational chart. Might you stop by when you have a minute so that we can sort everything out? A flush of heat swept over me, as well as a slight nervous jitter that would only be calmed by the massive ingestion of nicotine into my nervous body. With trembling hands, I lit up a cigarette right at my desk, and sat back to ponder what my move was. A multitude of discovery scenarios had played out in my head in the months leading to this unexpected twist, but they all involved the temporary stream of bullshit that would spray from my mouth should somebody ever, in passing, ask what it was exactly that I did. Nothing had prepared me for a meeting. Therefore, I decided on the smartest possible thing to do. Ignore it, like that lump on my balls. Don't ignore the lump on your balls, guys. I quickly deleted the email, logged onto the SA forums, Something Awful forums, and tried to clear my mind. It seemed to work for a few hours, as I was completely lost in complete bliss. Then that goddamn box popped up. The temptation to click, no, I do not want to read this this mail that has been sent to me by somebody that is most likely hell-bent on my demise, was overcome by curiosity, and my thumb subconsciously flicked the enter button to display what was surely another email from Miss Nosy. My worst nightmares were confirmed by the subject line. Re, not read. Question. The bitch had read receipts enabled. Those also sneaky checkmarks that for years have exposed management to the sheer number of must-read notices that go promptly into the employee's deleted items folder had once again surfaced to bite me in the pale white ass. The body of the message was even more ominous. I see that you are in. I will come down to your office to discuss. West side, first floor, correct? The irrational side of my brain begged me to supply her with fake directions. I rationalized the thought, believing that it would indeed buy me time, but realizing that it would only dig the hole deeper. I assessed my options for escape. And yes, tactically my mind works as a cross between Battlefield 1942 and MS Paint. I was without sufficient weaponry to meet her head-on, and she was coming towards me from one of my only two possible exit routes. The only other escape route was down the hallway and out to my car. Unfortunately, I was unaware of how much time I had left, or if she was hanging outside my closed door right now. It seemed an awfully big risk to hightail it down the dark corridor, past the rows of unoccupied, locked offices, and off to freedom. It was going to be close. I needed to get to my door, down 60 feet of hallway, and out the side entrance before she rounded the corner. I knew that as a man, I needed to face adversity in my life. It was either do or die. This was a test of courage and manhood. And there was no backing out. I just had to shuffle quietly 30 feet down the hallway and off to freedom, with the strong possibility of being caught in the act. It was truly a character-defining moment as I stood with my hand trembling on the doorknob, not sure if the recruiter was standing on the other side. This was a defining moment. So, like a jittery little adolescent squirrel, I scrambled to the other side of my office and went right out the fucking window. No qualms about it. Without even thinking twice, I slid the frost pane up and climbed on through. Unfortunately, I neglected my considerable body mass and fell directly on my ass as I slithered through the cold metal frame. Shaken, but safe. I crouched low to move away from my window, then glanced around to make sure that I hadn't been seen. Safe in my secrecy, I walked around to the other side of the building. I walked around to the other end of the building and got in my truck. Tearing out of that parking lot at the speed of light, my only thought was to get as far away from that place as possible and deal with what may come on Monday morning. So, 6 hours later, I'm at the bar, stirring over a rapidly warming beer. I didn't have much taste for alcohol that afternoon, and pondered my problems. I had used the payphone to call my wife to let her know I would be home late, as I had forgotten my cell phone back in the office, and needed to return for it. I had absolutely nothing in my mind of how to counteract the situation. I had figured that perhaps I needed to start making phone calls to vice presidents down at the corporate offices, doing damage control, and trying to rebuild what was left of my sidetracked career. I had resolved to do that on Saturday, but first I needed to get back to the office and get my cell phone. The parking lot was lit dimly by the orange glow of the low-powered streetlights as I pulled back into the office building. I casually walked up to the front door, sliding my keycard through, and strolled into the office. I expected that nobody was there, and walking with the calm determination that expectation brought. Oh shit, came a voice from my left. My heart leapt out into my throat as I turned to look. Sitting there in the corner office was Paul, our vice president of marketing strategy, burning the midnight oil, it seemed, with a bottle of Boone's farm wine, an opened jar of Vaseline, and a box of tissues sitting in plain view on his desk. His left hand worked fervently at the mouse button, in a desperate attempt to close down whatever had been previously graced his screen. His bald head grew red as he struggled to keep up with the pop-ups, a cascade of hot pink letters proclaiming "Hot Teen Buy Sluts" and "Anal Oriental Cum Bitches," leaving a virtual blood trail that betrayed his rapid attempts to conceal what he had been looking at. Mr. Moonshine? He started, his voice cracking. I didn't think that anybody was still here. No problem, sir. I was just coming back into... No, I really didn't know, honest. I don't get the AOL at home. I was getting set to walk away, but I stopped, looking over at the slightly overweight man, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I'm sorry? I asked. I don't get the web thing at my house. I was just looking at pictures. You know, adult pictures. I nodded and averted my eyes, but he continued. It just sucks since my wife left me. I looked back up, incredulous that this man, who up until today I had only met in passing, was doing anything but closing his door and trying to forget the incident. I'm sorry, I repeated again, and that's when the blubbering began. I don't know what to do. It's been 6 months. I've never even dated before. For God's sakes, look at me. See, you can tell. I was married for 18 years. I have no idea what to do. I can't even cook noodles. Oh, hell, I have no idea what to do. I tried to do the whole single scene thing, but I'm a fish out of water if there was ever one. It takes some time. I tried to console him cautiously. He motioned me into his office, trying to force a smile. Against my better judgment, I walked in and sat down. You're a popular guy, right? With the ladies? He asked. I raised my left hand in response, showing him the wedding ring. He nodded, then looked up to the ceiling, as if searching for what to say. But you're used to the partying scene. You could do the whole hip-hoppy music stuff, right? I nodded slowly, unsure of where this was going. Hip-hop, I corrected. He smiled as if I had just unlocked a great secret for him. I tried all that stuff, but I've been to the nightclubs. I'm just doing something wrong, said the overweight, balding vice president who had caught masturbating and drinking what most 14-year-old girls have grown out of, right in his office. I want to be able to go out and talk to women. I want to go out and drink beers and dance and have casual relationships. Is that an unreasonable request? I guess not. I squirmed. Can you help me? My mind raced. I had no idea what he was asking me to do. But then suddenly, something clicked in my head. I could turn this thing into my advantage. This stuff tonight. I started pointing at the computer. This stuff tonight. This is all our secret, right? He looked shocked. Of course. Why? I'll help you out. But you have to help me out. Have you heard of Nosy McInmabidness? Yes, she's up from corporate auditing the facilities. Well, she's all over me. You know I've been here for a while. You know I'm a good employee. How about you just tell her that I'm on your budget, in your department? That way she'll get off my case. He raised an eyebrow, smiling with the corner of his mouth. That may be possible. And if I do? If you do, I'll help you get back on your feet, as far as the social life. He reached his hand across the table and said, Deal. I looked down at his hand, then back up at him, grimacing mildly. He quickly withdrew it, replying, Oh yeah, right. I got up to walk out of the room, then looked back at him. I smiled for a second. MILFHunter.com, sir. Username is XXX, password is XXX. Knock yourself out. With that, I walked out of his office, and back into the world of feeling secure with my job. Come Monday morning, and on all the glorious mornings thereafter, I never again heard another word from the recruiter. Forgot about that part. Epilogue. It was inevitable. I had been saved by a vice president who played with himself in his rich Corinthian leather chair at work. I had to hold up my end of the bargain, and I did. About 2 weeks after the episode that still haunts my dreams, I convinced the wife and a few of her work friends to join me and Vice President Midlife Crisis at the bar. The night began poorly and went downhill from there. When we first walked in, I spotted him, sitting at a corner booth, tearing the label off a bottle of beer. We went over and sat down, and he perked right up. He was a talkative little bastard. I ended up learning his entire life story, except when a female walked by, at which point he would clam up like a 4-year-old boy. I knew that it would be a difficult situation, especially after 2 hours and about 5 more beers when he handed me a napkin and asked me to give it to that sugar bunny of a waitress. I nodded and stood up, looking down at the wadded-up paper. "You are a very beautiful woman. What time do you get off of work? Wave at me if you're interested." I resolved about 2 words in that note that I couldn't give it to anybody. So I walked to the waitress and pretended like I was talking to her at the crowded bar, which seemed to satisfy Paul. As I was doing this, my wife came up to me and gave me the equivalent of, "We've gotta go." So I had to think quickly. "Hey, how does Sandy like Paul?" I asked her. Sandy was a co-worker of my wife, moderately attractive, if you like the bleached blonde 80s pop star who got run over by a tractor look. She eyed me curiously. "Why?" "Have her come over here," I said. My wife waved her over to the bar, and she stumbled half-drunkenly towards us. I explained to her that Paul was really lonely and was only looking for a friend to pay some attention to him for the night. I also mentioned that he was horribly rich, an assumption, and that he was a really fun guy to be around, a lie. She seemed disinterested at the beginning, but then she took a different approach. "What's in it for me?" she asked. "What, like money?" I replied. Nothing in my life had ever prepared me for pimping, so I was kind of rusty when thrown directly into the situation. "I want one of your puppies," she stated matter-of-factly. I glanced at my wife, who shrugged. A week prior, our hound dog had a massive litter of pups, and we were having some trouble finding buyers for all of them. Now, Sandy was a nice woman, with kids, but very poor. I didn't see the harm. Okay. She smiled, then pointed at me, her finger waving drunkenly in my face. "No sex," she stated, then proceeded to turn around and walk towards our booth, sliding into the seat next to Paul. My wife and I ended up paying our tabs, then sliding out of there for the evening, all the while wondering what the heck was going to happen. The suspense was with us all weekend, until I returned to work that following Monday morning. The first message on my inbox was from Paul. It stated simply, Your wife's friend has great hands." Okay, Yoshikage Kira. I sat back, smiling. A puppy for a hand job, and the preservation of the American dream. All in all, a wonderful trade. Damn, this story's... Wait, why are there 2 epilogues? What the... Oh well. Chapter 5. Hey, do you work here? What a loaded question, I thought with a pause. Now, technically, I work here, as in I get paid by this company, in exchange for reading the forums and drinking Mountain Dew all day. At least that's what my brain has rationalized. I understand that it is really a buyer's market on people with my specific talents, i.e. laziness and or caffeine addiction, so I better play it cool when questioned. I nodded yes to the man who had asked me the question. "Cool, dog," he replied, whipping out a clipboard. I glanced around the dark parking lot, wondering why the fuck I had chosen this time in particular to come out for a quick cigarette. It was about 7:30 at night. I was the last person in the office, and I had thought it might be a good idea to sneak out for one last smoke in the cool night air before heading out. I normally don't stay past 4 or 5, but today I was supposed to meet my wife for dinner at a restaurant near my office, so I figured might as well stay at work and fuck around on the forums until the time came. "What do you need?" I asked the man, pretending to be in a hurry. I'm not horribly happy dealing with, random people in general, especially when they want something. "I got this delivery here for you guys," he replied, thrusting the clipboard in my face. He gestured back towards his very old panel truck, idling next to the loading dock. "Shipping and receiving is open until like 5, man. I think you should come back tomorrow morning." Aw, come on, man. I'm already running late," he whined, pushing the clipboard further into my face. I scanned his clothing and the truck, yet was unable to figure out what company he may work for. There was, of course, the chance that he was a spy. I took one last drag off my cigarette and was about to reply when he cut me off. "But it's Christmas, man." "It's December 3rd. "My kids don't know the difference," the man almost pleaded. At this point, I started to get a little uneasy about the situation. I just nodded slowly and took the clipboard. The man smiled and pointed to the line where I had to sign, and I accepted the delivery as Alexander G. Bell, because I'm not retarded enough to put my name on anything when it comes to this company. In short order, I was presented with 3 boxes, ranging from very large to very small. Excuse me. As the man pulled away, I looked at the address labels, which were hastily attached post-it notes with masking tape. They were intended for a coworker who had been released back in October for over a theft scandal. I opened the door and started to kick the boxes inside, weighing my options. There was no return address, no shipping label, and no indication of whom the boxes were delivered by. Crazy jittery guy driving a shitty truck. Anthrax or diamonds, I was clueless as to the contents, but curiosity ended up getting at me in the end, and I maneuvered all the boxes into my empty office. The thought of leaving these boxes outside the door of receiving crossed my mind, but they hardly seemed important, and were intended for somebody who nobody had seen in months. I proceeded to tear into the largest of the 3 boxes. Nothing could prepare me for what lay within. Globes. Not just one globe, but 4 globes, and a note, a cryptic note. "Hope you have a glorious holiday." Yes. Whiskey Tango Foxtrot over. 4 spherical representations of the planet Earth, all sitting on my office floor, accompanied by a note of questionable origin. I slowly moved over to the middle-sized box, wondering what the hell could be possibly inside. More globes. To be exact, yet this time without a note. Now, I don't work in any industry that involves high school history teachers, cartographers, or maniacal dictators. The purpose of the gigantic plastic planets was lost on me at the time, but I continued in my opening process. As I tore into the smallest box, I was greeted with yet another note, this one a bit more lengthy. "Figured you could use this stuff for a party. We haven't talked in a while. Make sure to message me. Candace." Inside the box were dozens upon dozens of packets. Packets of seeds. Wildflower seeds. And, of course, combs. 14 ace combs. I stood up and backed slowly away from the loot, plopping down in my chair. A cold winter wind shook the pane of glass behind me as I stared blankly down at the assortment of party items on the floor. Globes, seeds, combs, party. I needed a drink. But first, I needed some kind of reassurance that I was still sane. Just the slightest comforting voice that said to me, "Hey, you're okay, man. It's the world that's fucked up." I tried my wife on her cell phone. No luck. Without thinking, I dialed the number to my old office down south. Now, I don't really work anymore, but there was a time that I was a manager of a very large department at this company. For years I hired, trained, molded, and sometimes fired dozens and dozens of people. Relationships were formed, relationships that carried on to this day. I still get emails and phone calls from some of my old employees, asking for my advice on certain things. I knew that one of my dearest work friends was on the night shift that evening in our corporate office, so I dialed his direct line. "Hey, I've got a bit of a problem," I started. "I've come into possession of a goodly number of, random items." "Like what?" my friend asked. "Oh, like, globes." There was a bit of laughter on the other end of the phone, then a quick reply, "Probably for the management types there. Everybody has a globe." This made me think. I closed my eyes and thought back to as many offices that I could remember in this company, and a startling revelation was had. Everybody had a globe, but I never realized it until the mother lode of earthly scale modeling was dumped into my lap. I mean, really, how often do you notice a globe? When you see one, do you ever stop and wonder why it's there? A decoration of sorts, or something more sinister? "Hey, I've got a question for you." I was snapped back to reality by the change of the subject. My friend went into a long situation about a problem that he was having with a certain aspect of his job, the job that is done by the department that I used to run. I listened intently, then suggested a course of action that, although somewhat against the norm, would alleviate the problem in a timely and orderly fashion. Excuse me. My friend thanked me and hung up, and I walked out the door, leaving the random items sitting on the floor of my office, vowing to deal with it at a later date. 5 days later. There's only so much that you can do with a globe, I had come to find out. I had taken one of them out and placed it upon my desk, and had been staring at it off and on for a day and a half. So far, the uses for a globe, as discovered by me through intense testing, were: spin real fast, use your index and middle finger to run across the equator, try to step only on land, for added difficulty points, play President of the United States, spin globe real fast, close your eyes, point to place on globe, repeat 3 times, declare the 3 indicated locations as your own personal axis of evil. Mine is Spain, Arizona, and the Indian Ocean. As I sat, slack-jawed, staring at the globe, something truly horrible happened. My door swung open, and standing at the entrance to my office was a vice president. I knew the man well, and had worked in close conjunction with him numerous times in my old position. I hadn't seen nor heard from him since my move to the remote satellite location in Detroit. I had no idea he was even in the state, let alone the office this morning. I was unaware there was an all-employee management meeting in town. I nearly froze in fear as my right hand subconsciously scrambled for the mouse, minimizing everything on my computer screen. "Mr. Moonshine?" he began. "How is it going? Long time no see." "Very well, sir." I managed to form the reply. My eyes darted left and right, searching for anything incriminating in my office. Aside from OSHA posters from wall to wall, and a big pile of seeds, combs, and globes in the corner, everything looked almost professional. "I've got a problem," he began. I gestured towards a chair across from my desk, snapping back as quickly as possible into whatever management mode I still had encoded in my brain. "Well, it's everybody's problem. I think you know who I'm referring to." I shook my head. "Mr. Dipshit," he continued, and I nodded. Mr. Dipshit was technically my old boss when I worked at the corporate office, but he was the epitome of everything that you would not want in an executive position. He was clueless as to the specifics of the job, poorly groomed, racist, a liar, and a crook, who took personal vendettas to the next level. He also despised me from the start, as I was constantly making him look bad. Because of my longevity at the company, I was friends with quite a few people in senior management, and this always frightened him. Instead of coming to him, most would go behind his back and come to me, so he had been gunning for me the entire time that we worked together. However, given my current situation, I figured that he had all but forgotten about me. I was quite wrong, though. Mr. Dipshit calls me yesterday and says that you're going behind his back and trying to purposefully sabotage his operation. I blinked slightly and asked, he said what? Mr. VP smiled and continued. Oh yeah, he's up in a roar. He swears that you're sitting here running the company from your desk. I attempt to stifle a giggle. Mr. VP, who hates Mr. Dipshit as much as the next guy, nodded and said, And I told him that I almost guarantee that you run his department from your desk. I've talked to some of his people down there, and they all insist that you're always there to help them out, whereas most of the time they can never find him. I sensed that the conversation might be taking a bad turn, so I tried to turn it back. I never try to run anything. If people need help, I give that assistance. We're all on the same team, sir. But if Mr. Dipshit feels like I'm encroaching, I'll back off and let it be. Mr. VP raised his hand and shook his head. No, I want to make sure that things run right. I know that you're horribly busy up here, but I want to make sure that you're available for the consultation, if need be. I nodded, pretending that, in addition to my tremendous workload of posting on the Something Awful forums, I would sacrifice and answer a couple of emails a day, then asked, But what about Dipshit? Don't worry about Dipshit, VP replied, snickering. He's got a hard-on for you, Moonshine, in more ways than one. I tried not to show any emotion as my brain tried to rationalize the statement. He couldn't have meant what I thought that he meant, right? I mean, there's no way that a troll-like human being who's never been introduced to a Q-tip or nose hair trimmer could be... No. Cleanse my thoughts. I replied, my worried eyes betraying my true feelings. I knew I could count on you, Moonshine, Mr. VP said, as he stood up and walked towards the door. He stopped for a second, looking back at me. What is your title? I snapped back to reality as soon as possible, and tried the soft answer. Still a manager. VP nodded, then pointed at my desk. I'll make sure you get the management globe, he promised, then walked out the door. Epilogue. My globe with the executive wooden stand appeared a few days later, and now occupies a place of honor in my small office. Every once in a while, when I leave my door open, people will walk by and glance in, and, although nearly imperceptibly, I can tell that their posture straightens up a bit when their eyes come across that piece of furniture, that simple little object which says to the world, I am a monster of the corporate world. Within 20 seconds, I can tell you the capital of Madagascar. Now, fetch me some coffee. The 6 original globes still sit stacked up beside my bookcase. What to do with them remains as a mystery. I'm absolutely positive that one is earmarked for my Something Awful Secret Santa, but as for the other 5, perhaps I'll just leave them on random people's desk at work. If the secretary in accounting seems to be having a bad day, she may just come in the next day to a bright, shiny blue ball of plastic sitting on her desk. And maybe, just maybe, that will be all the motivation needed for her to continue striving on in the corporate jungle. The seeds and combs have all been distributed by random sampling. In the spirit of the season, I went through our Microsoft Outlook address box and picked the random names of employees all across America, and sent them manila envelopes filled with either seeds or combs, or a combination thereof. No return address, just little notes like, Merry Christmas, here's a comb, and seeds sends greetings. The poor man's Kris Kringle, I surely am, spreading wildflowers and well-groomed hair company-wide. The phone rang bright and early this morning. I finished the paragraph that I was reading on ESPN.com and went for the phone. Mr. Moonshine, came the voice from a cell phone. Mr. Vice President, I replied. Just checking up on you. Anything negative from Mr. Dipshit? Now, I had received a grand total of 1 email since the last conversation, and had solved that minor problem in a grand total of 5 minutes. But he didn't have to know that. Well, there's a lot of stuff, but I'm keeping it in line, sir. Very good. Continue running the company, Moonshine, he said with a laugh. Will do, I replied and hung up the phone. I thought for a second, looking down at my cell phone, and proceeded to run the company in the most productive fashion that I could think of. I beat my high score in Snake. Now that would conclude this story, but there is a little afterword and a little bit of epilogue, if you will. Afterward, never work a day in your life. The American Dream was posted to Something Awful essay by an unknown user. The author probably changed his name or had his account deleted. However, on March 17th, 2013, a Redditor named John Six told an incredible story on r/Tales from Tech Support about a similar person. The Redditor was working at an unnamed public sector corporation in London as a tech support, assigned to upgrade all the old Windows 9X computers. During one computer upgrade, he met a quirky man in a suit who fearfully demanded to know what they wanted. After the Redditor explains to him that they only needed to replace his computer, the man obliges but disappears. Later on, the Redditor constantly catches glimpses of him in pubs and during smoke breaks, and the man reluctantly makes small talk with them in an attempt to understand their purpose. Finally, convinced that the Redditor is no threat, the man decides to tell the Redditor his entire career story, how he's come to office for 11 years, since 2001, without doing any work, since his entire department was laid off, and how he spends his whole life in paranoid seclusion, fearing the day that someone catches on. Below is the Redditor's tale. I'll say it. Anytime I've retold this story, I don't think anyone has ever believed it. I have to be honest, I wouldn't either. However, me and at least 2 other people in the world know this to be absolutely true. I was doing a contract for a major national public sector organization. Obviously no names, but if you've ever been to London, you've been a customer. It was your standard high staff turnover, pay them till they get bored, throw them the BS task kind of role. Anyway, one day, myself and another contractor were set the task of a machine hunt. Basically, the network was a hodgepodge of bolted-on spokes using various standards, practically held together with poor soldering and bits of gaffer tape. However, there was a list of umpteenth Windows 9X machines which were apparently alive on the user subnets which needed re-imaging to XP or replacing. Our job was to do the pre-project hunt to determine who was using them and where they were. I say pre-project, it wasn't exactly thought out. It was some task that appeared from the ether which would most likely be refiled into the ether. This is the same organization who only a few months prior saw a £70,000 shipment from Dell literally get delivered outside their offices, which nobody retrieved or was aware even being ordered, and over the course of the next 24 hours were promptly retrieved by members of the public. Yep, it got left there overnight and there were only docking stations left. Good use of public money, right? Anyway, we hunted down an old compact on our list, serial matched, IP matched. Now, to talk to the user. The user was a guy who wore a gray suit, impeccably turned out, but who looked like he was about to wet himself with fear. He asked us several times who we were, what we wanted, what for, where was this information going, etc. After placating him as much as possible that it was just an upgrade program and we were IT support, he finally relinquished his name. It just so happened, another machine we were hunting for was right next to his desk. Our decision to wait around for the user to return was overshadowed by his worried glances. After a few minutes of uncomfortable, I'm pretending not to acknowledge you silence, we went away aiming to return later, ideally when he had disappeared. A few days later, the same contractor and I were out on a pub lunch. The guy happened to come in and immediately noticed us. He's weird, really weird. He walks quickly to the back of the pub, hovers, glances at us, and then makes for the door. Of course, now we're talking about him, like, what the fuck? He makes an about turn at the door and comes up to us. He nervously asks, "Are you definitely just IT support?" We reply and say, "Yep," and he just immediately leaves with an, "Okay, thank you." Of course we're weirded out, but whatever. We just put him down as a Fruit Loop. Again, another few days later, we're out on a smoke break. This guy appears again seemingly on a smoke break too. His eyes are wide as soon as he notices us, but as he's already lit his cigarette, he kinda has to come out now. We're wary of him. This guy is a fruitcake. He tries to make small talk. It seems to me he's probing, so I just come out and talk about what we do all day, pretending to moan about our menial duties. Anyway, it turns out after a few more chance encounters, he kinda settles down and starts talking, mainly about F1 racing, etc. He shows up again on a Friday afternoon drink, this time with his wife in tow. It turns out that he has every right to have been nervous. This guy was initially hired as part of a major projects team in the organization. He applied for a role, got accepted, gave a notice at his old job, and duly showed up for work as prescribed. However, as it turns out, in between getting confirmed for his role and actually starting, the entire major projects department had gotten nuked. The manager who hired him had left the business. Members of the team were scattered far and wide, yet he showed up. Some receptionist showed him to his desk where he was to wait for someone. Some receptionist showed him to his desk where he was to wait for someone, and nobody showed up. He made inquiries. All he ever got told was that someone would come talk to him eventually, but nobody ever did. For the last 11 years, he had shown up for work. Nobody ever hassles him. Nobody ever asks him for anything. Sometimes he just doesn't show up, and nobody questions it. He gets paid every month, gets a statutory annual pay raise, and that's it. He's been filing his time writing books for the past 8 years on this and that the other. And that is literally what he does every day. As the fiscal office he's in also has a high staff turnover, there's no time to make relationships or for anyone to even really acknowledge him. Of course, he was slightly inebriated at that point. I just thought he was plain outright nuts, permanently residing in Psychosville. I didn't believe a word of it. It's too Hollywood to be true. That was until the Monday morning. We had to check. Sure enough, HR systems showed his department had indeed been nuked mere days after he was recruited, and his active manager on the HR staff had indeed long since left the company, the business. Everything we did to verify his story checked out. We even performed a few random drop-ins, and sure enough, there he is with Word opened, and he's tapping out page 370 for a novel. He never seems to do anything. Of course, he's back to being nervous again as he lets his guard down while drunk and told someone. Even his wife at the time seemed to corroborate his tale. I left the contract a couple of months later, but as far as I know, he's still there. I still even question the reality of such a situation. However, on my first day of that role, I duly asked where IT was. I was told to go with a massive group of people to induction. I passed 3 checkpoints where security guards asked my name and, though I wasn't on their list, let me through with an, "Okay, must be a mess-up." One even said, "Who's your manager?" To which I replied, "I have no idea. I've only just arrived." He, too, allowed me through. What I went into was an entire day's induction for permanent staff. A lot of sensitive stuff got said. A lot of activities went on. Nothing catastrophically major, don't get me wrong. But there we have it. On leaving and switching my phone back on, I had several voicemails from my recruiter demanding to know my whereabouts. I told him I had been in induction, which surprised him. It took me another 30 minutes to track down which IT department I was even supposed to be in, and even a day later got told I was still in the wrong place while I was arms deep in laying some network cable. This place was so disorganized, I cannot think of anything to discredit his account, other than how absolutely jaw-dropping it is. Thus, it's possible that Moonshine may still be living the dream to this day, forever fighting to prevent HR Nazis and nosy investigators from taking his livelihood away. In that case, Godspeed to you, Moonshine. You lucky fuck. And finally, our epilogue. The real epilogue. Or, rather, a simple retelling. The Old Man of the Abyss. An alternate retelling of the Redditor's tale from the perspective of the Man in the Gap, written by Redditor Two Hands. Some time ago, before Google Glass, before Vista, before people were downgrading to XP, there was a man, A rather unremarkable man. He was so nondescript that they made him a singular point that others couldn't help but miss. He was hired, among others, to work a large project, among others, and was meant to be fired, among others as well. But there is a gap between the hiring and firing, or rather the firing and his hiring, wherein the layoff paperwork had been put in and the man's hiring hadn't yet been completed. This wasn't a very large chasm, but as a singular point of nondescription, he fell in. He was in the pay system, so they let him in. He had a workspace, so they let him use it. Then they just failed to notice him. It was surreal. He would ask about work, and immediately after asking, he'd be forgotten about. He had no boss. He had no task. He had no purpose. He just occupied some space that nobody was using. At first, he reveled in his non-job employment. He could do as he pleased. Show up, do nothing, go home, get paid. Show up, do nothing, go home, get paid. Do nothing, get paid, do nothing, do nothing. In our world, men are defined by the work they do. This man had no work. This man was undefined. He had fallen into the gap and never gotten out. He had grown comfortable in that little gap, so much so that the prospect of leaving it terrified him. He had grown so accustomed to being beyond notice that when a person actually spoke to him, he nearly drowned in terror. With a gap as small as his, terror can fill it in an instant. He choked on fear and could barely bring himself to ask what the people wanted. IT support. That's just what they might say if they were trying to pull him out of his gap. They can't be telling the truth, but they are looking at his computer, so they just might be. They're still here. Maybe if I don't talk to them, they'll go away. He keeps seeing them around. Each sighting brings a new wave of terror that feels like it takes minutes off his life. He goes to relax with a cigarette, and there they are. In his panic, he almost runs back inside with the cigarette lit, but has the sense to try to act like nothing happened. He tries to crawl into a bottle to hide for a while, but they even find him there. The jig is up. The news is out. They finally found him. The renegade who had made retrieved for a bounty. The lyrics pounded through his head as they blared on the radio. In his alcoholic days, he figured they had given up on harassing him and were there to collect him to end his career. So he told his story, one last burden to unload. A story of quiet desperation in a small hole where bureaucracy and apathy collide and leave a small hole in the size of a man. And thus he was forgotten. It wasn't long before the IT support people had moved on, leaving him in the abyss. No one was sent to retrieve him or escort him from the building. The first few weeks he went to work with slightly more terror than usual about being found out, but no one did. And to this day, somewhere, someplace, the old man still lurks in the abyss. And that concludes The American Dream from Something Awful Forums. That was a fun read. Had a good laugh. Of course, the sources are from She's Archive of American Dream. She archived a lot of stuff. And then a couple of Reddit threads, The Forgotten Employee, and then the Redditor's epilogue, of course. If you were a fan of The American Dream, there's also The Cubicle Jungle. Maybe I'll read that another day. But for now, got a lot to edit. My name is Rezafi. Thank you for those who are watching this VOD, or come from the original version that will get uploaded eventually. And good morning, good afternoon,